Taylor, thanks for your time with Paul and Craig. David Smoak and we'll get to the standings that were released last night. We will, but we've spent a lot of time on that. Let's get into Texas Tech and BYU. The freshman phenom in Bachmeier. Baron Morton bounces back in Texas Tech at home, and just the atmosphere, the scene, and the showdown in Collision Course Saturday in Lubbock. Your thoughts?
You know, we had, thanks as always for having me on, guys. We had, for our show Inside the 12, we had Joey McGuire on this morning and got a chance to visit with him. And, you know, it was great. He opened up his comments. His first thing that he talked about was, you know, it's only about 40 yards, he said, from their facility to where he parks his truck. He said it took him almost an hour to walk that 40 yards last night after he left the facility because of all the kids that are out, camped out, waiting for tickets for the student section. He's taking pictures and autographs and visiting with those kids. And I think it speaks to, you know, this is the biggest game in 17 years at home for Texas Tech. You got to go back to when they hosted Texas the last time College Game Day was there in the Graham Harrell, Michael Crabtree, you know, back in 2008. It's a massive deal. It's a huge game for the league. I think it's interesting that it surprised a lot of people. I think where the line is, you know, that this is I think it's still sitting at 10.5 for this game in favor of Tech. But there's massive implications. The fact that they have game day and that both of these teams ranked as high as they are right now in the first round of the playoff rankings. You know, everything's on the line really in this game for both of these teams.
Taylor, why is Bear Bachmeier so good so soon?
Well, I think BYU and that entire staff, Sonny Satake and his staff have done a great job of week in and week out protecting him. And I don't just mean with offensive line protection and not getting him hit. I think the way that they have played complementary football in all three phases has really benefited any quarterback, but especially a freshman quarterback. They do not, very rarely when you watch BYU, do you see them backed up inside their 10-yard line, or very rarely do you see them get to a 3rd and 7+. They do the little things right on early downs when they have the ball to get it to 3rd and short. Obviously, running the ball well helps. They don't turn it over. In the turnover margin, they've done a nice job all season. And in special teams, they really don't get behind the sticks very often. And I think that's been the biggest thing in my opinion, for having a freshman quarterback. They're not asking BYU and Bear Bachmeier to go the length of the field and have 10+ play drives consistently in a game. The last thing that I will say is BYU, I think, has had a pretty favorable schedule to this point of the season. I think the back half, obviously the win over Utah, by far the biggest win in their season so far and extremely impressive. But I think the schedule to this point and the lack of road tests, you're going to see that obviously put to the test this week against Texas Tech. And it's a team that, you know, November I think is going to be challenging. They still have a game against TCU on the schedule that no one's really talking about. So there are some tests left. Obviously starts with Texas Tech this week, but they've done a great job of insulating and protecting Bear Bachmeier all season.
Taylor, it seems like every conference race is got like 5 or 6 teams sort of involved. I think the Big Ten's maybe the clearest one with Ohio State and Indiana, but with the Big 12, you've got the rankings released last night, BYU and Tech, and obviously in a massive showdown. But, man, the metrics love Utah, and they just went and smacked Cincinnati last week in what was a pretty hyped-up game. What were your thoughts on how one-sided that was, and where do you see Utah like in the big picture of the conference race and just sort of where we are right now?
I think it's still a really good football team. I was surprised how high they were ranked. I was surprised, and it was very clear that the committee valued where Texas Tech is as a league at the top compared to the ACC. The fact that they were ahead of both Louisville and Virginia surprised me. I think the way that they beat Cincinnati and the fact that their 2 losses were against a couple of the top teams, I think for Utah down the stretch, what's going to be most interesting is if they win out, you know, what help do they get up ahead of them? And is this a team that we're talking about getting one of the at-large bids, even with 2 losses? Now, that means that they really need some help from teams like Oklahoma and Texas to move out of the way. What happens with Oregon down the stretch? I don't think we see Notre Dame lose again, but, you know, it's possible, certainly. But I think the biggest thing that stood out to me overall, and you kind of alluded to this, was, again, the respect given to the Big 12, that there's 3 teams in the top 13 and 0 ahead of them out of the ACC. That I agree with, but that really surprised me that they didn't have either Virginia or Louisville up ahead of Utah.
Taylor, anyone overmodulated in the first standings, which again will change and change and change again? Was there anybody, and if I saw any kind of reaction, it might have been that Notre Dame was back up already into 10.
I think there's a human element to Notre Dame, and we've talked about this. I think there's no way that they would ever say this, but anybody that remembers how that game went down with Notre Dame against Texas A&M and the holding call that was missed at the end of that game on that final scoring play for Texas A&M, I think there are people in that room that are still considering that probably should have been a win for Notre Dame. And when you look at their 2 losses against a Miami team that I think playing much better then than they are now, and then against Texas A&M, where really should have, in my opinion, been a win for Notre Dame. It wasn't, but should have been. I think they're getting the respect there with especially the Texas A&M loss. Now, the argument you could make, especially for Texas, when you look at their quality wins over, who is the best win for Notre Dame right now? I'm not sure that we have a great answer there.
USC? USC?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. But I think for Texas, you look at how they played. That loss against Ohio State, I think, is aging better and better as the season goes along. Florida, not so much. But this is another one that I wasn't really bothered too much by where Notre Dame was right now, because the teams that we're talking about with Texas and Oklahoma, this is all going to sort itself out. If Texas runs the table somehow and has wins over Georgia and A&M down the stretch, well, then it's not going to matter. You're going to see them in the playoff anyway. I think the one sort of at the back end that surprised me was how high they had Iowa ranked, a team that was not in the AP poll, but that a lot of people were calling for, getting them ranked. And then Tennessee, I think Tennessee is kind of your classic example of an SEC team ranked because of their quality losses. I would not have had them in the top 25, but I think that'll be one, again, that will sort itself out. But I would not have had Tennessee ranked.
Yeah, I always have trouble understanding what a quality loss really means in the grand scheme of things. I know it means that you lose to a good team, but it's just in the annals of sports history, I don't think if you asked anybody who participated in a loss, they'd have been like, oh, damn, that was a real quality loss.
Can you imagine walking up to a head coach and go, well, this was I know you lost, but it's a quality loss. They would chew your face off. Yeah.
You're exactly right. But I think it does come into play. And it's the only reason. How else do you justify seeing Tennessee with where they're at right now? Because there's not, their win over Mississippi State. I mean, they escaped barely with a win in Starkville. But you look at the 3 losses they have on the schedule, a lot of could have been and should have been. Should have beat Georgia, but didn't. And I think, again, it's not a team that I would have had ranked, but seeing them in the 25 spot surprised me some.
Taylor, I know things are maybe a little bit up and down for your Rice Owls there, but the American is a hell of a conference with a heck of a race heating up here. And one thing that was noticeable from those rankings was there's nobody from the group of 6 at all. I just kind of wanted to pick your brain on who you think that most likely candidate will be. Memphis seems to be kind of that hot pick right now, whereas it was USF and so on and so forth, Tulane. But what do you think of the race shaping up, and just who do you think ends up being that team that's able to crack this thing when all is said and done?
Yeah, the American, for as hot a start as they had, the losses in the last few weeks, feeling like they're sort of starting to knock each other off. Memphis beats South Florida. Memphis loses with an injured quarterback to a really not very good UAB team. Tulane goes on the road and gets smacked in the Alamo Dome by UTSA. And now you look up and say, exactly what we're talking about. Is there a team here that's going to separate? I still think the best group of 5 team overall is South Florida. I think top down talent, how they, in resume as well, how they went on the road and beat Florida, even in a down season for Florida, the front that they have, it's a Florida team that turns around and beats Texas. So To me, that's the most talented team. The one that I think is under the radar that no one's really talking about right now, but I think could surprise people in the month of November, is San Diego State. San Diego State, in my opinion, is the best defense at the group of 6 level. 2 shutouts already this season, another one where they held the team to 3 points, another where they held the team to 7 points. And I think you're going to see down the stretch with some key matchups in the Mountain West. They're going to have to win convincingly going away in order to get the respect, I think, because the Mountain West overall is down compared to the American. And the Mountain West doesn't have the great out-of-conference wins that I think the American has a couple examples of. But that, to me, if you end up with the American round-robining one another and you end up with San Diego State there at just one loss and they've been blowing people out versus like a South Florida or a Memphis sitting there with 2 or 3 losses potentially, to me, I would go with San Diego State there because, again, I think defense travels. And if you're asking who has a chance to compete and win in a playoff game, I actually think San Diego State's defense would keep them in almost every game. If it's not them, to me, I would go with South Florida, though. I think that's the most complete roster out of the group of 6.
I figured you'd mention the Aztecs, and I'm glad you did because just minutes before you joined us, we were talking about the Colorado OC change with Pat Shermer, and I was like, well, Sean Lewis is better off because, you know, he was there, and he's doing a pretty damn good job right now for San Diego State. So, yeah, I figured you'd mention them, but glad that you did.
Sean Lewis, anybody that isn't familiar with him, look up his bio. Took Kent State to 2 bowl games. I think the experience at Colorado, he would, if he was able to be honest with us or anyone, I think he would tell you glad to be out of Colorado after just the one season. And then for San Diego State, turning them around quickly. I mean, the defense that they are playing right now, it just choked people out. It's unbelievable how solid they are. And had one game this season that got away from them against Washington State. But you remember early in the season, you know, how well Cal was playing, and they pitch a shutout at home over the Cal Bears. So I have a ton of respect for Sean Lewis, even if they don't make the college football playoff this year. I think that's a guy that, you know, wouldn't stun me if he leaves after this season because he's going to be somebody that I think will be a point of conversation for some of these jobs that have opened up.
Yeah, I think they broke Cal. They were doing well early on, and then after that game, they kind of broke them, Taylor. Okay, so we have another big coach opening in Auburn, and this one was, you know, he wasn't the hottest seat in the SEC going into the year. That was Billy Napier, but he wasn't far behind. Are you surprised that this happened in any way, shape, or form?
No. Once we saw them lose to Kentucky, that was a very similar unraveling, I would say, in a lot of ways to LSU, where it's not just this, and it's not just the body of work from Hugh Freeze's time there. I think you're more looking at, is this a fan base that is going to be able to tolerate this staff and your head coach moving into the offseason and going forward? And I think the answer very clearly was no, that you were not going to be able to right this ship. And with regards to NIL and support moving into the offseason and what they're going to have to do in the portal, I think it was time to make a change. I also think to have the 2 misses that they did at quarterback in the portal the last 2 seasons for a guy that is, in Hugh Freeze, has hung his hat on being an offensive guru and the production he had previously on the offensive side of the ball, that's pretty damning to put up 3 points at home against Kentucky. So not surprised that they made a change. If I'm Auburn, and this is, a lot of people have said this, I get that, but I'm going after John Sumrall at Tulane. And even with Tulane and how they looked a week ago against UTSA, I think Sumrall on the defensive side, what he did at Troy, how he has Tulane performing, that's a program builder and somebody that I would be less worried if I'm Auburn about going out and getting a splashy hire versus more like what you see out of Texas A&M, where let's get an adult in the room, let's get somebody that is going to coach at a high level and really get your program back on track, not just winning on a down-to-down basis and recruiting at a high level, but how you look off the field as well. And so to me, I think John Sumrall checks a lot of boxes, and it would be somebody that if I'm an Auburn fan, I'd be very excited about.
Where are you this week?
Bye week, my only one. And I'm going to be, I'm going to have the lineup ready to go. We're going to be watching BYU and Texas Tech and fired up to be a fan this week.
What in the hell were you wearing in the pregame show for the UConn and UAB broadcast, Mr. Sir?
They said even though it was November 1st that we should still do costumes, and Paramount, who owns CBS, also owns SpongeBob, so that was allowed. So he had the SpongeBob headgear in the booth, which, you know, mixed reviews, but I thought it was funny.
No, I just happened to see that, looking for what game you might have, and of course Dracula SpongeBob. I thought I was watching Nickelodeon there for a second, but no, you do a hell of a job, Taylor. Thanks for your time, buddy. Have a great off week. Enjoy some decompression time. We'll talk to you next week.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.